Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to my next election prediction video. Today we're going to be taking an update, or I'm going to be updating my predictions on the 2022 governor elections. Sorry that I was not able to do this last week. I was at the beach in Myrtle, South Carolina. I had a great time, and I'm happy to be back. But I'm happy to be back and do this for you guys. I considered making my prediction at the beach, but I just thought, you know what? I'm just gonna take some time off, and here we are, 3 weeks later. So sorry about that 1 week hiatus, or that delay, but I'm back and I'm ready. So let's start going through this quickly because last time it took a long time for me to complete this video. It was 45 minutes. So right now I'm just filling out the safe Democratic and Republican states. These are states that are going to go to either party by 15% or higher, not really going to be competitive at all. California, Gavin Newsom is going to win his re-election easily, even though he did face a recall in 2021, but he was able to defeat the recall by an extremely large amount, an extremely extremely large amount. Sorry, I can't speak today. Um, just about the same as his 2018, his original 2018 election. In fact, it was almost exactly the same. Look at that. Uh, for Republicans, an example, this would be like Wyoming, where Mark Gordon is going to easily win his reelection. He does face some primary challengers, but I don't think that's going to be, a big deal, really. Wyoming, the only reason people would talk about Wyoming in this election is because of the Liz Cheney's Republican primary, but that is a topic for another video. So you can see Maryland and Massachusetts right here are safe for the Democrats. They both have Republican incumbents, Larry Hogan in Maryland and Charlie Baker in Massachusetts. Larry Hogan's term limited, and because Maryland usually leans to the left politically, almost always, really, governor elections um, are the only really statewide office that Republicans are able to obtain. And because their incumbent won't be running, it's going to be very hard for Republicans to be able to hold this governorship. Same thing in Massachusetts, although Charlie Baker has voluntarily decided not to run for a third term. Because Massachusetts does not have any term limits, as you can see, he won by 33 points in 2018. He's first elected in 2014 very narrowly. Both of them are very liberal Republicans who won't be up for re-election. And even if, well, they are up for re-election, but they're not running for re-election. One of them could have, but decided not to. And they're both very liberal, moderate Rockefeller Republicans, and so that's going to, that's not going to be very appealing to many Republican voters in the state. In Vermont and New Hampshire, you might be wondering, why in the world do I have Vermont and New Hampshire red? That's because of Phil Scott and Chris Sununu, the Republican governors of the state. Very similar situation to Larry Hogan and Charlie Baker. These two are very liberal Republicans. Well, Phil Scott more. Chris Sununu is more of a moderate Republican, but they are both very popular around or across the state. New Hampshire and Vermont are actually the only states that do not that elect their governors every 2 years instead of every 4 years. It's an old tradition of states to elect their governors every 2 years, but most states have shied away from it, but not these two. So you can see in their most recent elections in 2020, even though Biden won both of these states pretty handily, Vermont especially. Phil Scott won by 40 points. Chris Sununu won by 32. So yeah, and they've both decided that they're going to run for re-election now. It's official from Phil Scott. Chris Sununu decided not to challenge Maggie Hassan for the Senate, which, has helped Hassan in many ways, but he's going to easily win his re-election as governor of New Hampshire, and so will Phil Scott as governor of Vermont. In Oklahoma, this was one of the states that had a primary this past week, and Joy Hoffmeister will be taking on Kevin Stitt, the incumbent Republican governor. Hoffmeister is a former Republican and is currently the state superintendent, as you see. She's running on a much more moderate Democratic platform to try to appeal to some moderate Republicans in the state, but Oklahoma is Oklahoma. It's going to vote Republican. Interesting thing is, Oklahoma's governor elections have been somewhat narrow in recent years. In 2018, Kevin Stitt won his first election by only 12 points, but that was a blue wave year. More surprisingly, Mary Fallin or in 2014, a very strong year for Republicans. So you can see, look at how red this map is. Not even any blue or solid blue states except for California. But Mary Fallin only won by 15 points, so that's pretty interesting to see. But Kevin Stitt's going to have an easy time both at the U.S. Senate seats. All of Oklahoma's statewide offices and House seats are, going to go Republican. Oklahoma super is a super strong state for the GOP. Anyways, that's really all I have to say about the solid states. We're going to be putting in the likely Democratic states now. I'm moving Illinois down to likely, but I'm moving Maine up to likely. Not going to talk a lot about Connecticut or Rhode Island because I spent last time talking about those. In Colorado, we'll get into that first. Jared Polis is easily going to win re-election as governor. I've seen some people put it as solid, and I could see it being a solid Democratic state, but I think that with the national environment so heavily against the Democrats, despite their ability to do well, I don't think it's going to be able to put Polis over the 15% mark. He won by 10 points in 2018. Pretty impressive. I think it could be similar to Biden's margin in Colorado. He's going to, you know, Biden won Colorado by about 14 points in 2020. I think it'll be somewhere around there. Of course, Polis will be, winning the urban areas easily. Will be winning Boulder and Denver. I don't really think Boulder is all that urban, though. I mean, it is, but yeah. That's not the point. The point is, Polis is pretty much safe in Colorado. If the national environment wasn't so against the Democrats, despite their ability to do well in polling, and Roe v. Wade being overturned, which is going to affect some of these races, I would have put Colorado as safe Democratic. Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer is really not taking, is not really um, she doesn't really have any big opponents anymore. The front runner for the Republican nomination, James Craig, was kicked out because he had an invalid amount of signatures. The Board of Elections in Michigan took took him off the ballot along with a bunch of other Republican candidates. Ryan Kelly is now the front runner for this race. He was actually recently arrested because of his involvement in comments about January 6th, which has actually boosted his chances in the Republican primary. And Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer is dominating. I predicted that Gretchen Whitmer would have a very hard time just back this fall winning her reelection. Doesn't seem like the case anymore. GOP, the GOP really doesn't have any good candidates to go up against Whitmer anymore. I don't think it'll be a 10-point margin like in 2018, but I could see it being a 5 to 6 point margin, possibly somewhere around 7 to 8. So yeah. In Illinois, J.B. Pritzker is going to win his reelection. I really think that it comes down to a point. Illinois is also another state that held its primaries this past week. Ooh, look at that. I did not see this poll. So Darren Bailey is leading in this actual poll, but there's no way that this is actually realistic. J.B. Pritzker is going to win his reelection. Yeah, this was sponsored by a Republican pollster, so yeah. Ignore that poll, that is pretty inaccurate considering Illinois' history. Just look, 2018, Pritzker defeated the incumbent Governor Bruce Rauner by 15 points, and because the national environment's a little bad for Democrats, or more than a little bad for Democrats, very bad. This should be a red wave year, but Democrats are still able to withstand some of the damage that has been inflicted upon them. Um, so Pritzker's margin will probably decrease very slightly, so just under safe. But I think Roe v. Wade being overturned will help him in the state. In Maine, Janet Mills. I think that Roe v. Wade being overturned is going to help her. Paul LePage is an extreme candidate, pretty much done. He's the self-described Trump before Trump. That's not going to help him in Maine, where they rejected Trump twice, as you can see in 2020. Biden won the state by 9 points. Clinton only won the state by 3 points, a little surprising. Maine's second district has become very Republican in the last couple of years. but of course, this is a statewide election. LePage, was the former governor of Maine, but he was elected before Maine started using ranked choice voting. In fact, he is pretty much the reason because he was so unpopular in Maine. So, yeah, and Janet Mills just has an advantage. Maine is one of those states where it's a possible swing state, but it's not going to be super competitive in this election cycle. I think Janet Mills is a pretty strong incumbent. I think I could have seen her losing back last November, but I think Roe v. Wade being overturned is going to boost her margin to about 5 or 6 points. So that's all I got to say on Maine. We're doing pretty good on time. For the likely Republican states, I think this is the same amount as before. I have Alaska, Texas, Florida, Iowa, and Ohio. I'm going to talk about Iowa and Ohio first. I am considering putting these in the safe column just because of the popularity of the incumbents. Kim Reynolds is going to win her reelection handily in this state, but I think it's more likely for this state to be likely than the Senate election. I know I have put the Senate election in Iowa as likely, but that's only because of a stronger candidate against Chuck Grassley. But once more polling comes out, I'm sure that it will show a more a growing lead for Grassley, and I think he still could win against Michael Franken by a strong margin. I think Kim Reynolds is probably going to win by 13, 14 points. It'll be just under safe. Same thing with Mike DeWine. He was facing a very strong primary challenge from Jim Renashi, I think is how I cannot say his name for the life of me. Let me see. How do you say his name? Renasi, yeah. So he was very vulnerable in the primary, but he was able to win handily. Democrats nominated Nan Whaley, which is not a very good candidate. She's very progressive for Ohio standards. Not going to do well in. I don't know if I'd call Ohio a former swing state because it is. It's still the swing state. It's just very Republican leaning. I think the Senate election is going to be a lot more competitive than this. There's also an independent Neil Peterson who's probably going to take away some Democratic votes. So you can see DeWine leads by 15 points against Nan Whaley in this poll. So yeah, I think that Ohio could be safe, especially when you look at the electoral history of Ohio's Republican incumbents. John Kasich won by 30 points in 2014. Um, Robert Taft won his reelection by 20 points. So there's clearly, and I pointed this out because Wikipedia even points it out. Since 1958, when Ohio governors began serving 4-year terms, every Republican incumbent has won a second term by a double-digit margin. I think that's going to be the same for Mike DeWine. He's a much more moderate Republican than some, so I think that that's going to help in some states. So yeah. So I think that's actually no, we have a lot more likely states to cover. Florida, Ron DeSantis going to win his reelection against either Nikki Fried or Charlie Crist. I think it's going to be Charlie Crist, really. Let's look at the polling. Yeah, he's still ahead against Nikki Fried. I have considered moving Florida down the lean, but DeSantis is just so insanely popular. Charlie Crist has been overtaking him in some polls, which is interesting, but still Florida is trending farly rightward, very fastly or quickly to the right. Not fastly, that's not a word. Um, and even though DeSantis only won very narrowly in 2018, keep in mind it was a very good year for Democrats. And Trump won the state by 3 points in 2020 instead of his 1 point margin in 2016. So, yeah. Florida is getting redder and redder by the minute, but it's still somewhat competitive. I keep wanting to go to the lean states. Texas, Greg Abbott's going to defeat Beto O'Rourke. I think that not a lot has changed here. Beto O'Rourke is a very strong candidate for Democrats, but Greg Abbott is an electoral juggernaut. 2018, when Democrats did very well, he won by 13 points. In 2014, he won by 20. Texas has had a Republican governor for almost 30 years now. In the most recent poll, Abbott is defeating O'Rourke by 8 points. Again, O'Rourke is a very strong, candidate. Look back at 2018 when he only lost to Ted Cruz by 2 points. But then again, the national environment was on his side. I think because I think Greg Abbott's going to be a very tough challenge for O'Rourke. I could see this moving down the lean, but as you can see, it's, somewhere from 5 to 10 points in these averages. I think, it's going to be somewhere around there. But, yeah. Anyways, that's all I got to say about Texas. In Alaska, of course, Mike Dunleavy's running for his reelection. He's running against Bill Walker and a Democrat whose name I do not know. Um, Bill Walker's the former independent governor who lost in 2018 after coming in third place against Dunleavy and Mark Begich, who was the former Democratic senator from the state. So you can see he only gathered 2% of the vote. I did not know it was that low for him. But yeah, he didn't really campaign, and he's probably not going to win this time around. But I think because Alaska is using ranked choice voting, it could, become somewhat competitive. But I still think Lisa Murkowski's race against Kelly Shibaka is going to be more interesting to watch. So that's it for the likely states. We're making good progress. I don't have as many lean Democratic states this time. I have four. Let's go over Oregon first because Oregon is very interesting. No new polls have come out, but Oregon has a history of not voting very strongly for their Democratic governors. As you can see in 2010, John Kitzhaber only won by a single point. Oregon hasn't elected a Republican in 40 years. This election season, this election in 2022 might change that. There is a term limited governor, Kate Brown, who won in 2018 and in a special election in 2016, but she's not going to be able to run because Oregon sets term limits on their governors. And so there is an independent in the race, Betsy Johnson, who's going to split the vote with the Democrat Tina Kotek Kotik. I'm not sure how you say her name still. I'll have to look it up. Um, the Republican Christine Drazan uh is leading in this one poll. I don't think that Oregon will go red, but I think there is certainly a possibility to it, especially when you see how close Oregon's races in the governorship have been in the past couple of decades. So that is interesting. But still, I think that Ron Wyden in the Senate election is going to, encourage more of Oregon's population to vote for Democrats. Oregon is traditionally a very liberal state, has been for a very long time. The Portland area, it and Washington are really dominated by their western urban areas, whereas the eastern side of the states are more conservative. And so I think that's going to help Tina Kotek win, or Kotik. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that name. New Mexico, Michelle Huluhan Grissom is in real trouble against Mark Ronchetti. This race should not be so competitive for Grissom. I didn't know this, but she's actually related to Benry Lujan, one of the Democratic senators from the state. She's only leading by 3.5%, and she is leading right now. Lujan Grissom was involved in a sexual harassment scandal with one of her staffers, which is going to bring her down in the race. But New Mexico still has very strong history for Democrats, not so much for Democratic governors, but Lujan Grissom won by almost 15 points in 2018. Of course, Susana Martinez won by 14 points. It's actually the exact same margin in 2014 and 2018. So that's interesting. But New Mexico, might turn out like Virginia, where Biden carried it by a pretty strong amount. Biden won New Mexico by about 11 points, yet it could go red if Democrats do not give it enough attention. In Minnesota, Tim Walz is running for his reelection. He is fairly safe. Minnesota does have the longest Democratic voting streak in presidential elections out of any state in the whole nation. Hasn't voted for a Republican presidential candidate since 1972. That was Richard Nixon. Um, Minnesota, though, has been narrowing up in recent elections. Hillary Clinton only won it by 1 point in 2016. Biden won it by 7 points. And Tim Walz won by 11 points in 2018. So I think Minnesota really does have a lean towards Democrats, especially with the urban areas, but you never know. Might surprise us. And finally, in Pennsylvania, a race I'm sure a lot more of you are familiar with, or are more familiar with. Josh Shapiro, the incumbent attorney general, is running to succeed term-limited Democrat Tom Wolf, who was reelected by strong margin in 2018. He's running against Doug Mastriano, who is known for his involvement on January 6th and his far right political views. He was able to dominate in the Republican primary. Shapiro won his primary unopposed. And this race has been unexpectedly close. I think that Doug Mastriano is really the worst candidate Republicans could have put up, but this looks even closer than the Senate election between Fetterman and Oz. And that surprises me because for a while I thought Oz and Mastriano do have a chance at holding on to Pennsylvania. Oz, of course, will be holding on to the Senate seat. Mastriano will be flipping the governorship. But Shapiro, in the wake of Roe v. Wade's overturning and Mastriano's unpopularity, it's going to be very hard for a Republican to win in Pennsylvania, and I think a lot of that goes for Dr. Oz as well, but he has some more. His issues are more centered around him being what some Republicans refer to as a rhino, or a Republican in name only. Finally, I have the last two lean states there for Republicans: Kansas and Georgia. Georgia, Brian Kemp's is going to defeat Stacey Abrams this November. He did face a challenge from David Perdue, who was the senator who Jon Ossoff ousted in 2021. He actually defeated Purdue by a very strong margin, not at all what I expected. I actually made a video roasting Purdue, but I mentioned that beforehand. Kemp is very strong in the state. He has been very conservative, but he did stand up to Trump, and that's why he voted to he certified the 2020 election results in which Joe Biden won the state of Georgia in 2020. Of course, Trump did not like that, and so that's why Kemp faced a challenge from Purdue. But he did very well. And Stacey Abrams is a lot more controversial of a candidate. She was, of course, the candidate in 2018. There was some voter fraud, possibly, that went on in Georgia because Kemp was the incumbent Secretary of State and may have uh, done some things that would have influenced his victory, but I'm not going to get into that. Not going to make this video politicized. In Kansas, Laura Kelly is the most vulnerable Democratic governor up for re-election. She won against Chris Kobach in 2018, a very terrible Republican candidate for governor, a very far right. Kansas, even though um, it's looking to be a pretty strong year, or a possibly strong year for Democrats, because of Roe v. Wade and the gun violence and um, their ability to harness voters that are upset with Biden's administration. Kansas has a very red history. Of course, there is a Senate election with Jerry Moran happening at the same time that is not going to be competitive at all. And I think Derek Schmidt, who's the current Attorney General of Kansas, is going to do very well against Laura Kelly. I think that he'll beat her by about 4 points, but there is still a possibility that Laura Kelly does win. But in order for her to win, Democrats need to capitalize on pretty much every race. I think Kansas is more likely to flip than Georgia is to flip to Democrats. I mean, Kansas would be flipping to Republicans, but you get my point. Anyways, final free states. I think we're doing a lot better on time. We have Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada's tilt for Democrats. Wisconsin, Tony Evers, I think, is going to benefit from Roe v. Wade being overturned. Wisconsin's first governor polls in a long time have been released, showing Evers doing very well against Rebecca Kleefich, the former lieutenant governor of the state, and against Tim Mitchell's. Evers did underperform expectations against Scott Walker in 2018. Scott Walker is, of course, the former Republican governor of Wisconsin. Um, Wisconsin does not have governor term limits, so Walker was running for a third term, and he had a very strong electoral history. And Evers was actually expected to beat Walker by a much larger percentage point. We can actually go to look at the polls from 2018. Of course, polling is not everything, but as you can see, it wasn't until really the bare end that Tony Evers had this 1 point margin over Scott Walker. So, anyways, I think that against any Republican candidate as of right now, Tony Evers, would narrowly eke out a victory. This is, of course, a change from my last prediction when I had Wisconsin as tilt R. And these two, uh, Nevada and Arizona becoming tilt Democrat, are changes as well. In Arizona, Kari Lake, or Republican Governor Doug Ducey, also had certified the 2020 election results in which Joe Biden won Arizona. Trump did not like that. Ducey is not allowed to run for a third term as governor of Arizona. He thought about running for Senate against Mark Kelly, but he decided not to. That might have been because Trump said that he would endorse Mark Kelly over Doug Ducey. That just shows you how much Trump hates Doug Ducey. So it's an open race. Katie Hobbs is the presumptive Democratic candidate. She's the incumbent Secretary of State. Kari Lake is the presumptive Republican nominee. She is a very bad candidate for Arizona, as I've said in my previous prediction. She has talked about imprisoning those who voted to certify the 2020 election, including Hobbs. Because Secretary of State in every state certifies the election results, the federal election results, or pretty much any election that goes on in the state. Correct me if I'm wrong, I might not be exactly right on that. But Kari Lake is doing very well in polling, better than Blake Masters is against Mark Kelly. But still, I think that it's going to be very hard for Lake to appeal to moderate Republicans, like McCain Republicans in Maricopa County, which voted for Joe Biden. That's pretty much the only reason why Republicans lost the state of Arizona in 2020 was because Maricopa County was not going their way. And that's because they've become more extreme in their ideology, and I think that that's going to hurt them this November. Finally, the last state, Nevada. Steve Sisolak is running for his reelection. He won against or not Paul Laxalt, Adam Laxalt in 2018. Laxalt's now running for the Senate against Catherine Cortez Masto. Joe Lombardo is the Republican candidate. Sisolak is very vulnerable. He only has a 2 point lead in a 2 point average lead against Lombardo. I think that this race is going to be very close. The most recent poll shows Lombardo winning against Sisolak by 1 point. I think Nevada, being a very pro-choice state and Roe v. Wade being overturned, is going to push Sisolak very narrowly over the finish line. So, as you can see in this final prediction, we have Republicans winning 26 governorships, Democrats winning 24. Democrats, of course, flip Arizona, Massachusetts, and Maryland. Republicans flip Kansas, and so results in this map. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Sorry if this video took a while. I know it didn't take as long as the previous video did. It was probably about 30 minutes. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Click the like button, subscribe, share, turn on notifications. Check out my main channel, Interactor127, where I do non-political stuff. If you want to hang out, and see some more of my videos, have a good time. Also, check out my comrade Grelin Zeus 666's channel. He should be back to YouTube very soon. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next predictions. I'll see you in about 2 weeks or possibly sooner. Hopefully, I'll try to upload on Interactor127 again soon. And I'll see you next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.